Well, as everybody's getting settled in, I'll introduce myself. I'm Shawn Bainbridge, and I'm an agricultural and environmental consultant. I live in Greensburg, Indiana, and I've been doing this for 17 plus years. So soil fertility is kind of my forte. We do a full consulting business as far as crops, weeds, any kind of agronomic troubles you might have or challenges. I've also gotten in the last 10 or 15 years involved with some project managements for the Monsantos, Dows, DuPonts of the world. They'll have big farm trials, and so we kind of gather data for them. So it helps me as a consultant to be involved with those because I can see some of the new things coming down the pipe and help my clients use those tools. And kind of that same thing we'll talk about today is kind of your agronomic toolbox a little bit. And as a consultant, you know, I'm asked to help integrate new tools into their farming practices. And sometimes it's not easy for everybody to use those tools or know how to use them. And that's kind of one of the things I do, find out what they're about and help you as a farmer use them and find out if they're good or not for your practice, for your farm. So let's just start out. So, you know, if this thing will work for me. Maybe. Of course, there's always going to be a hitch in your giddy up. Come on. There we go. Okay, so we all started out our young careers as farmers with a toolbox. Grandpa bought you one, mom got you one, dad got you one. It had 4 or 5 things in it, you know. And our agronomic toolbox started the same way. You know, we either had a mentor, we had a grandpa, we had a dad that we watched, we learned from, and you started out with just a few things in your toolbox, and from there it blossomed, you know. And you got a pretty good sized toolbox, you know, a decent one. You kind of know how to use everything. Over the time, you kind of figured out, you know, what works on your farm, what doesn't work, and you can bring new tools in, and sometimes they benefit you, sometimes they don't. Well, we all want a giant toolbox. We want to have all those things available to us, but can we all afford, you know, $50,000 worth of toolbox? You know, can we afford to every new little trinket, every new little tool that you have out there? Can you bring it into your farm? You know, is it really valuable to you? Does it make money? Does it just cost you money? Is it just a toy? But so again, as an agronomist, as a consultant, those are the things that I like to try and help each and every one of you utilize. You know, how are all those new little tools or old tools that you've got sitting around that you haven't really used in a while? You know, we've seen train wrecks of toolboxes. You know, we guys just don't know how it organized, or it goes through a fire, and all of a sudden you're going through it and you're going, well, gosh, I haven't used that in a long time, but I'm paying for it. Is it really, you know, benefiting me at all? How do I kind of go through my agronomic toolbox a little bit and kind of clean it up? You know, we want to go back to kind of, we've all had a good tried and true toolbox, and that toolbox still holds tools. There's nothing wrong with it. So why go away from it? Why should we ever put anything new in our toolbox? It works. You know, like today, let's talk a little bit about some of the basic things in your toolbox that you want to keep, that you really use a lot. For example, today, our hosts, Smith Implements, they're a tool. You know, they help you provide your hardware, some of your software. They'll help you fine tune a lot of those things. And then from there, you know, you might have more than one supplier of hardware. You know, you may not just be loyal to one brand. And that's where you learn from different people on how to utilize those tools. What's another basic component or a tool in your agronomic toolbox that you use? Anybody?
Fertilizer dealer.
There you go. The CPSs of the world, the co-ops, the COVAs, they're a tool. And you could utilize them in many different ways. You know, if it's just fertilizer, they can give you that, or if you buy all your chemicals from them. And you might use multiple dealers for those different types of information. What about your banker? Is he a tool? You know, does he impact your agronomic decisions? You know, your farm credits of the world and how they interact with your farming operation, they're a tool. They help guide you in your ways. What's the one more? Anybody? Seed dealers? You know, there's all sorts of different seed out there, and having them in your corner guiding you in those different directions. But you know, how you use them is vitally important. And you think about each one of those components, each one of those people or entities have things they're trying to sell you, and they're all a tool. And if you bought every one of them from all of them, you know, would you make any money at the end of the day? So you got to kind of figure out which tool is good for your farm practice. You know, let's go back to and then again, I'm sorry, that as a consultant, you know, I'm another tool. You know, I don't necessarily sell anything but information. And I gather information on farms such as your all's to help you make those agronomic decisions. You know, new fertilizers, how to interact with, you know, different miners, what works, when doesn't it work, and then interpolate that back to your chemical dealer or your fertilizer dealer. So let's go on. We'll think about, you know, do you really want to have all your eggs in one basket? You know, does John Deere is a fantastic thing, but do you use them for everything that you do? Do you use somebody else for everything that you do? You know, wouldn't you be better off if your relationship with other people and you get more information from multiple people involved? I encourage that. I mean, I love being the source of information for all my clients, but if they're out gathering information from other people, we can get together and kind of talk about that and see what works into their program. Wouldn't we all like a toolbox like this? Super organized, it's all there, it's all put together, you can see every bit of it. And your agronomic toolbox would also ideally be that same way, but it's really not. You know, when we start out, we'll put all these things together and hope they work. And in your farming practice, you need to have checks and balances. Because if you don't, you could throw something, for example, a minor element into your starter, fertilizer. Well, it costs you X to put that in there. And do you really know, did it make you any money? Did you get any yield out of the deal? Did you have more plant health? If you don't have checks and balances there, then you're just kind of putting that out there, and it's a tool that you don't know that you're really utilizing. And then also, you know, everybody likes a new shiny tool. I got 3 emails this morning on the way up here on new apps and new things that you could utilize. But is it really all that valuable to you? You know, we could go on and, you know, again, a disorganized toolbox is one of those things that over time, you get so many tools in there and you just keep throwing them in and out, and you don't really know what's making you money. And how you utilize those tools. Let's talk about some of these new ones, like a nitrogen. You know, that's a big buzzword right now. All these different new tools and apps that you can pay, obviously, a dollar figure, and they'll give you a shiny new tool and how you utilize that. But is your farm really ready for it? So I wanted 2 examples to kind of give you where one was a farm they've taken their nitrogen program from stem to stern. They really worked it. You know, they started and they found that key number of amount of nitrogen that works on their farm, in their soils, that upper level. And then they've broken down their nitrogen application. They figured out, okay, I'm going to put so much up front, side dress, I'm going to put some at a later date. And they've really honed into it. And they've got equipment that they could variable rate with. So now they get an offer of one of these new nitrogen management tools. They're probably ready for it. You know, they've really explored that program. Now, if you've got somebody that has all their nitrogen up front, has never explored their values, have never really done anything different, and they get this offer and they see, well, you know, this would be great, but are they really ready for it? You know, the variable rate nitrogen for them, they don't even know if their side dress would benefit them, or if another application later on at, you know, at R1 would benefit. You know, so just because they're out there doesn't mean that you're ready for that tool. We, as in the consulting business and agronomy in general, you know, you got to individualize all of your tools. And I can have a conversation about each one of my tools that I bring to the table, and I don't utilize each one of those the same as I do with each client. Some clients like me to call them weekly. Other clients don't want to see me ever until I need to give them something. And those are the things that, you know, help me understand my clients. So move on a little bit. You need to empty out your toolbox. You know, if you don't know what's in there, it's kind of been disheveled, you just kind of need to throw it out on the table and see what you've got and who you're utilizing and what you're not utilizing. You know, if you've got 10 9/16 wrenches in that toolbox, do you really need all of them? If you pare them down to 2, and then you know, okay, let's see how that works. And over time, you might find that, yeah, I really needed all 10 of them. But if I'm not utilizing them, why am I paying for that? One of the things that I like to do is, you know, just play on the strengths of each farmer. And some have strengths with fertility. They know their soils. They know kind of where they're at and how they want to go. Other people know their cropping systems. You know, when it comes to cover crops and rotations, and they know how to work their soils. And I like to fill in the blanks, and that helps them be better farmers. But if you don't know what's in your toolbox and how to utilize those tools, then how do you get better as a farmer? How do you make more money? Again, we can all aspire to have a monster toolbox and go out and just spend huge amounts of money on all these tools and then open that drawer. But if you don't know how to use it and you've spent all this money and you're not making money on those tools, it was all for naught. So have I missed any tools that you guys want to talk about today? Anything that there's questions on, like some of the weather data now. I mean, weather is kind of our mistress a little bit. She is always tough to deal with. We're trying to predict it. I don't know how a computer model will ever find it or predict it, but they're trying. Do you guys have favorites of any kind? And what's one favorite tool that you guys use in your agronomic practice that is your go-to? Anybody have one? Be your chemical guy. You know, do you utilize him all the time? Do you utilize your seed guy all the time? I get utilized quite a bit as a consultant because of the things that, you know, our interpersonal relationships, and I know those fertility levels, and I know those soils, and I interact with them enough that I know how to help them in those, crunch times. So, again, we'll go back to just your everyday toolbox. That you don't have to have the biggest toolbox to be the best farmer. And $3 corn and $8 soybeans, you want to understand where your dollars are going, and using all of the capabilities that you have are vitally important. I've had conversations about minor elements and when to cut these things out, and cutting them out doesn't necessarily make you more money if it's costing you a yield at the end of the day. So again, we've talked about having a cleaned up toolbox. I wanted to talk about some different apps that they've come along with. Pioneer's got one, they're in Circa app, and in Field View for climate. They're both good apps. I don't have a favorite over any of them. I think they all work really well. We're seeing that the universities and the companies, they never agree, but the University of Illinois actually has a pretty good app, and they're seeing some nitrogen losses, and they're actually quantifying them. So it's pretty cool that the actual technology is coming together with the actual field data. They're fantastic, actually. And so we can let those guys talk about those, because I'm not an expert at them, but they're really good. Again, how you utilize them is vitally important to your operation. Being able to take advantage of them and working with them in your operation is how I like to see them used. But yeah, I'm trying to think what else. And I guess I forgot to talk about soil fertility a little bit. The one thing that I've used in technology is, over the years, we've taken from starting just mapping fields to some zone sampling, to smaller zones, to variable rate technology, to multi-hybrid technology. All of those things you can incorporate into your farming practice. But I don't know that all of them at one time will benefit you in dollars and cents. If you throw them all out there at once, you really don't have a check and a balance. I've seen clients buy a brand new planter and put all this technology on it, and they say, oh, it's great, and it worked really well, but I didn't really see any yield change. Well, we need to play with a little bit. And that's one thing that I've tried to do is, incorporate soil fertility levels and overlay mapping data, and then we'll do some variable rate seedings, and then try to incorporate that and see how they interact. So with that, I guess I don't know how much time I've got. What time is it? 30 more minutes. So who wants to talk? Oh, there's questions. I love questions.
Do you have any experience with fumigation or fertigation?
Yep.
Things there?
So the things with chemigation and fertigation, in the biggest thing I've seen is the fertigation side. It's all in the controllers. They've gotten some variable rate controllers out there with their different sprinkler heads. So that works really well in a lot of the new pivots. The timing of fertigation on your nitrogen is vitally important. And I think that kind of goes back into those weather apps and those nitrogen apps. And if you can map your soils out and create a good zone and understand if it's a sandy soil, if it's a clay soil, kind of where those nitrogen rates are, and I think the controllers have a lot to do with that. You can utilize your nitrogen rates a lot more readily than you can if it's just a flat rate.
Even if your soil times change 4 times to pivot up the.
Well, and that's the hard part is, how do you, again, a variable rate, does it, if you got 4 soil types, you're gonna have 4 rates, but does it really benefit you that much to change it that often? It all depends on how much control you have and you want. I honestly, I don't see, I'd rather see 3 rates in a field than 4 or 5. It doesn't make sense to have that much variation involved. I think timings on your chemigation are more important than anything. And again, it's those weather predictors. If you can see a system coming and you know that you've got a rain coming, you don't want to put out any fertilizer. You want to wait. But that, again, Mother Nature's a mistress. You just never know what she's going to bring to you. But I think minor elements in chemigation and your fertigation side are, I think that's the thing that you can tune in. Some zinc applications, and later on, I think you'll see that be more of a benefit. And then, fungicides, we've done quite a bit and seen those over the top, and they work. But the problem with is, if you fungicide your pivot, then your corners, those are, the timings on those are just a little tough, and how you incorporate that. But yeah, I think the fun thing with the new, I think the controllers help you with that timing, and then putting on drops, and that, again, that's another thing. Your droplets, if you can change those, and getting a smaller droplet into your irrigation, that's a lot more of a benefit than anything. So, especially in fungicides. So, anybody else? Question?
So what's your knowledge on nitrogen in application? We went to harvest land, had it, and it said the greatest yield potential is proper application of it.
Sure.
Potential 25 to 94 bushel per acre.
So there you go. So the question was, what's my knowledge on nitrogen application? And so let's talk about that. Nitrogen application is probably our biggest dollar figure that we put out, besides our seed, and the timings of it. First of all, we have to know our soils and know what our capabilities are. And I think a split application nitrogen is vital. You can't put it all up in front and really vitalize and utilize that entire scope of that crop. So when I say that, I think a pre-plant application of nitrogen of some sort, be that 40 to 60% rate, and having a stabilizer of some sort, and then coming back and side dressing with another 25 to 30%. And at that next stage of that R1, VT timing, maybe if we could come back and do that again. But again, that's if you have time in your operation, if you have that utilization skill, if you've got the machinery, it all goes back into those tools. It would be great to have Y drops on a sprayer, but can everybody afford to pay that? And do you have the time to do it? There's other things in your cropping system. You got cattle, you got hogs, you got, there's skiing to be done. You don't know if you want to go do other things. But I think nitrogen application, split timings are that's the first thing you should do in your operation. And
Can you put a quantified number on it though, as far as splitting it up versus all pre-plant versus a split application? Can you put a number on it that we can turn into a dollar figure to justify those
exactly.
additional passes and applications?
And that's where you need to work with your your other guy or your consultant and work through those, you know. And you can't just turn it on and say, okay, well, let's just do it. Let's try something. You know, I think you can absolutely gain, you know, 10 to 15% on a split application. You know, it all depends on Mother Nature. And if you put it all up front, you put a little stabilizer on it, and you hit a good spring, and it's all still there, you know, I think you're hedging your bet by doing a split application. They've got the machinery out there. You know, these fast machines, all these 28 applicators, you can cover ground now. And it's not it's 60 foot at a time or 40 foot at a time, and you can do it. It's just a matter of, you know, again, quantifying and knowing that it's going to pay for it. I've seen it. I've seen it happen a lot. Go ahead.
Do you see any difference between having a knife every bolt and one skip row?
It depends on your spacing.
30
If you're on 30-inch rows, I would one every 30. If you're on 20s, you could skip. But I would most definitely have one every 30. And go ahead. No, it's fine. I would absolutely have one every 30-inch row.
What options are available for us for the R1 application?
Well,
A lot of us ran into problems trying to get nitrogen on this last year because of the water.
Well,
They tried some creative areas to get out there.
so, and we dealt with that last year, you know, so we did some sampling, we did some testing, and saw some shortnesses. Now, does it pay? You know, that's the thing. If you're going to be doing a late pass, you've got to get it down to the soil, and you've got to have the tool to do that. Honestly, I don't think, if it's before VT, I think you're going to gain something. If you're past that window, even if you spray it on with a plane, I just don't think that's a good economic expense. It may look better, but I honestly don't think it puts more money in your pocket. Now, if the Y drops and getting it down into the soil, or Haggie's bar, their tool bar, I think if you can get that nitrogen into the soil, into the root zone, you're going to gain from it, absolutely. But I honestly don't think at R1, over the top with a plane, you're really going to benefit that much to do it then. But again, if it's wet and you can't get a ground rig in there, your only option is to go over the top with a plane.
You have clients that did it wide?
We had some Y drops used last year, and they did, when they could get in, it did pay. You know, they saw some differences. And I had some that put some over the top, and we saw some spots that we think benefited from it, and then there's some areas that didn't. By and large, I think the expense of over the top at that kind of that rescue thing was not. I think it was just more of a personal thing. It made him feel better than it benefited.
Do you have a preference in stabilizers?
You know, ammonium thiazole is great. I like that, but again, it's all in your system. If you can utilize ammonium thiazole as a pre-plant and incorporate that, I love the Exactrix system. It's expensive, but it works really well. It's a good meter. You know what you're getting out. You can cover ground with it well. The Raven controllers work great, but depending, and you know, multiple different stabilizers at different timings. You know, we've seen a lot more benefit. Let's take a soil that's good in fertility level. We're medium to high. We're not lacking anything, and so putting on some 100 pounds or 200 pounds of phosphate or potash before planting, and that as that gets into the soil solution, we're seeing some benefits of that in our crops later on in the season. And same with the nitrogen. We're using a stabilized, if you're going to use urea over the top and spread it up, that small little window that it holds it back is good. But again, it's all in your system and what you think works into you. I'm trying to think. Can't think of the one, but anyhow, yeah, a stabilizer works. It's just a matter of which one is timing-wise, and I don't think you need to stabilize all your nitrogen. You know, there's a couple different options for your like one thing that I've been working on was your 28. You know, you can get, you know, there's different blends. They're talking about an 18-18-9, and the different types of, and it's Anderson's blend, and the cost of it, you know, they were talking about an 80-20 blend and a 50-50 blend, and I honestly don't think that the 80-20 blend, it costs more, and there's supposed to be more of a stable nitrogen. And I think the 50-50 blend does just as good a job. You're only talking a 7-day window that it's actually going to hold it back. Well, that's really nothing extra. You know, I think you're better off to not pay that extra for the 80-20 blend. So, anyhow, go ahead.
For the guys that don't have multiple years of yield data, and even those guys that do, would your recommendation be on prescription seeding and nitrogen to base it strictly on the soil maps, or do you want to try to use that farm history on the yield side?
So the question was, for the guy that doesn't have multiple years of yield data, how do you do prescription variable rate seeding and nitrogen? What do you base that on? So first, you know, if you could utilize the soils data that you have and what yield data that you do have, and however you're working your soils, you know, if you're testing it on a grid or if you're using a soil zone, start with those zones for your variable rate seeding. And then you know those zones, that field's much better than anybody else, and go in and take that variety, have 3 rates with that variety. You know, a high, a medium, and a low, and then go through that farm and say, okay, we know this hillside, we want to cut back on that one. We want to turn it up in the bottom, and then use that as your basis. If you can use at least 1 year of corn data and overlay it, they should pretty well line up. And then your nitrogen rate's the same thing. If you don't have a lot of experience with varying them, you know, try 2 rates. You know, have your base rate and have a high and a low, and do 3 or 4 passes in each field, and work it that way. If you don't experiment on your own farm, you know, you won't know what you can do. You don't have to variable rate it. I honestly don't think you need to variable rate everything. I think the technology is great, but if you don't know a base rate, once you've experimented and you know a good base rate, and you know a high and a low, then you can turn on the variable rate technology and utilize it. It's kind of like what I was saying with the tools. You know, if getting a new shiny tool is great, but if you don't know how to use it, why have it? So I'm sorry, there was a question back in the back.
I was just going to make a comment. You asked about the wide drops. And we had a situation this last year where our corn never got to the nitrogen. We had side dress. We had put some on with put some in on with when we planted side dress. The corn never really got to our side dress nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And we used some wide drops on that and had a significant
Absolutely.
on that. But I would say that that's a year specific to what we had. Because of the reason it couldn't get to it, we got the nitrogen right there to the roots where it could really take off. But the other thing too is that we did get some continual moisture on there to keep it there and to allow it to work.
Right.
So,
And there again, it's an environmental impact. You know, again, we could put it all, our nitrogen up front, and if we've got good weather, it'll be fine. But again, in your case, your side dress, it didn't get there, and you got it optimized right there at the root zone. And the one thing about a wide drop that I do like is, you know, those dewy mornings, there's always moisture in that little 6 to 8 inch zone. And that, as long as that wide drop runs through there, you're gonna get better utilization of that nitrogen because it's going into more moist soil. Even in dry years, you know, there's always a little bit of a wet zone. But you know, finding that rate on that drop is going to be key for every operation. You know, what to utilize, and that's why if you put some on pre-plant, you know you've got some in the ground, you stabilize it well, and then you've got options later on. You can, if you see that you've got a good yield, a good crop coming, we can turn the rate up. Go ahead.
Say you pick up a new farm, so basically you just know it's been adequately taken care of, it's kind of a rookie farm. And you're at like U10, how many samples and what type to come up with some sort of?
So the question.
You got 3 soil types within that.
So the question was, pick up a new farm, you're a little unsure of it, you know it's in pretty good shape, but you come back at V10 and you're ready to side dress, you know, what kind of samples do you take to kind of figure out what your rates are? So you want to go back, and if you've got 4 soil types, again, it'd be nice to have half a dozen samples or 6 to 10 out of that field. And if you could do a nice 12 to 14 inch soil core out of that across the row, and then that way you get 2 replications at least across the way. You know, you want to get 2 out of each soil type, and that way you don't get a hot one or a not so hot one. And I would definitely recommend doing deep core and not. The problem I see the most is when you're sampling for side dress nitrogen, the sampling is done incorrectly. And you need to sample from the center of the row all the way across to the other center of the row. And you really need a dozen cores across that 14 inches deep. And that's a lot of soil to get. And if you don't go to the back of the field, you're gonna miss something. And we've actually been involved with some really deep core sampling. 24 inches deep, and a lot of these companies are looking for that deep nitrogen. How far is it going? Where's it going? When's it going? There's even some that I'm involved with one this spring that's 30 inch deep, and they're just trying to find out what that bottom is and how far it goes. But again, 14 inches deep is the minimum when you do your side dress sampling. And again, that's something that, you know, if you're doing it yourself, you really need to have those samples turned around fast. They need to be at a lab within 24 hours, because then you'll get a good number. And again, that number is just kind of it's a broad range. If you find that, you know, it's that from 600 to 2,000, you know it's high. If it's between 600 and 100, it's in that medium range. But it gives you something to quantify it. You know, okay, I need to really get after it. And again, if you have those zones created already, then you want to sample in those zones and be able to tag that and put it in your variable rate controller, and off you go. Any other questions?
Do you have much experience with the Varus tool to help create these zones?
So, the Varus tool, been around for a while, been around for a long time. There's a new, I guess, revitalization of the machine. It's a good machine, but the problem with the machine is that it's calibration and the guy running it. We put quite a few acres on one, a brand new one this year, and it's got the pH chute. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's got a 2-inch core on it. The problem with that is getting it into good soil contact. And when you run it, you can run that machine all summer long and you'll get a different number all summer. It's all about soil moisture. So if you pick a bad fall and you run it and it creates this beautiful map, it may be a skewed map because you had a dry fall and it didn't give you the proper number. You have to do physical sampling to quantify those things. I like the Verus tool, but again, it's having a guy that's running it, that knows how to run that machine and running it at the right time. Again, it's another tool that works really well if used properly. I wouldn't use it solely to create a soil sample map or an application map of any sort. I would definitely, start with your zones that you've created, overlay that on top of it, and maybe shrink those and use that Verus tool to do it. The pH meter, it's a shot in the dark. It really is. And they charge a whole lot of money to run that rig. But again, it's a tool down the road. Once you've kind of started and you've created a zone and you've worked that zone and you know, okay, I want to fine tune my nitrogen program, that's the tool that you want to take it to the next level.
So how would you recommend creating these management zones? What, based off soil types and yield data?
Well, yeah, soil types, yield data, and they just did a really, and was it 2013, the new soil maps and those aerial imageries. Elevation maps, those are another tool that you can throw in there, and they work really well. Again, elevation has more to do with your variable rate seeding than anything. And if you could get a good elevation map and use that with the Verus or with your soil samples or your soil type map, that you're better off with that than anything. And all that's free. They're out there. I think the hardest part with the technology is having somebody that's willing to work with it and work through it, that's in your toolbox, and utilizing it and finding, John Deere's got a great program that they're running out. Sam's getting ready is starting it to help you utilize that data. And I do that with my clients as much as I want. And I try not to push technology. I try to help it. I like cutting edge stuff, but being on the cutting edge sometimes isn't always as profitable as it could be. So you got to kind of feel out what's good, what's bad, and then when somebody finds something that they like, let's go. We'll make it work, and we'll find out if it works. Anybody else? Questions? Comments? Talk to me about your fertility. What drives your economy to there's a lot of owned acres and there's probably more rented acres than there are owned. How do you guys go about making those management decisions? Are you, obviously rents have a lot to do with it and cost of goods, but do you have a different philosophy on a farm that you own compared to a farm that you rent? Do you have a nitrogen program that's different from an owned farm to a rented farm? And so how do you set that program up for each one of those? And again, that's all goes back into your costs. And that's what we're at right now, trying to figure out, okay, how do I budget this? What nitrogen rate works for me in this farm, in this situation? And there might not just be one flat rate. Again, if you own the farm and and you know that farm, and I want to turn it up, and I want this to do as best as it can, I'm not too worried about spending a little extra dollar on it, then let's utilize some of these tools. So anyhow, again, it's pretty informal today with me, and again, I kind of like to go back again to the old tried and true toolbox. You've got those tools in there you've used for years, and you know they work on your farm, but you always want to be striving to do a little something new and a little something better. You need to kind of bring in some new things, some bigger and badder things, you know, and that's the only way we're going to survive in this farm economy. You know, it's a world economy. If we're not trying new things and trying to get a little bit bigger toolbox and a little bit better, then we probably won't be here in 15 or 20 years. You know, and the tried and true tools, your seed guy, your fertilizer guy, your chemical guy, you got to utilize them and take advantage of the opportunities that they have. But the biggest thing I see in the coming years for agriculture itself is, you know, these tools and how you use them. And the costs of them are extraordinary, but the benefits could be even more if they get them right. But you got to utilize the guys in your toolbox to take advantage of them. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. I'd love to have some questions.